Hello, my name is Tom Barlow. I'm an ordained elder in the Mtn Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church and the director of the resource program here at the Island School of Theology. Our denomination, the United Methodist Church, is at a crossroads in terms of conversations around theology, but also structure. And those conversations focus on issues of sexuality. We're not here to discuss the specific issues of sexuality today. We are here, however, to discuss what could come to be in the life of the United Methodist Church. This isn't about this conference, and it's not about this jurisdiction. This is about our denomination at large. In our conversations, what we've done is we've actually reached out to folks from different perspectives, different viewpoints, different ends of the spectrum. But we're not talking with them about theology. What we are talking with them about is what could happen? How do they feel about that? Where are their passions? And what will they tell others if we end up with a denominational split, if we end up heading off in different directions? The first question that we offered to our interviewees was this: describe your passion for following Jesus and your passion for God's grace. How are those passions moving you at this time?
I grew up hearing the stories of Jesus, of being taught of God's love and grace for all people. It was a beautiful story. I loved it. I connected to those stories. And then as a young adult, I experienced God's grace personally. That those stories of Jesus, of his love, his life, his death, his resurrection, were a personal story for me. And it was transforming and freeing, and I wanted so much more. And so I fell in love with Jesus. And that is a passion that continues to drive me today, because I want everyone to know that the stories of our scriptures, the stories of God's love for us, is for everyone, but it's also for each one of us individually. So my ministry and my passion is driven by sharing that love and helping folks have those moments of transforming love and grace.
So when I think of my passion for following Christ and being able to be uncensored, being able to live in a freedom, being able to live justly, that is what drives me to encourage others that being a Christian or following Jesus, that you can do it as your whole self, as your complete self, that you can do it in freedom, that you can do it living justly, that you can do it as yourself, that you as who you are is enough. So those things together, working together passionately, speaks to me as freedom, justice, and equality.
My passion really does begin with God's grace, and that's rooted in my experience of God's grace. It was about 5 years ago when I experienced the opposite of that and became very aware of my brokenness and in many ways the sense that I had become quite lost, not only to God but myself. And it was the miracle of God and his grace that when I finally came to grips with that reality, that was the moment I became overwhelmed with a sense of God's loving kindness and gracious forgiveness in the midst of that. That where I was broken, God was prepared to heal, and where I was lost, God had already found. So my passion begins with grace.
Now that you've had a chance to see those interviews, go ahead and stop the recording and reflect on this question with folks in your group. The second question that we asked of our interviewees was this: what are the outward forms of church that you find yourself attached to that it is hard to imagine being without?
I would have a hard time being without a congregational body, a community of some sort, to be able to worship and serve. If the church were to change or to be transformed in whatever directions, there still needs to be a congregational body or some kind of community where there is a place for people to rally around their faith, a place for them to grow and encourage one another, and a place for them to be able to express their faith through acts of service.
That connection is so important, and it is very difficult to grow spiritually when you're in a vacuum. So connecting with other women in UMW and in Women's Spiritual Journey have led me to grow in very treasured ways, and I've been very thankful for that. I can't imagine not having those opportunities.
Worship is very important to me. I love the music, whether it's the old hymns or contemporary music. I love to preach, but I think what I'm rediscovering and returning to the local church is that sense of community that the local church provides, that exists in the congregation there. I mean, this is the place where I can share my struggles and victories and share other people's struggles and victories as we care for each other, even when we may not always agree with each other.
Now that you've heard the responses from our interviewees, please stop the recording and reflect with your group on this question. Welcome back. For our third question, it's a little longer. The Commission on a Way Forward is proposing a one-church model that requires choices at 3 levels: at the congregational level, at the annual conference level, and by individual clergy. How do you see those choices affecting you and your communities?
The One Church plan offers a lot of flexibility. It offers a realignment, and it's sort of a custom fit for a custom church.
I think the problem that I see is in the tension that's created when those decisions don't line up with one another. And when you have annual conferences empowered to make one decision and a church in that annual conference making a different decision, and the pastor making perhaps another decision. And where those collide, I think that's what concerns me the most. And honestly, I believe that and would hope that the General Conference would take responsibility for making decisions in our conference or in our denomination, and then leave churches and pastors and conferences to respond to that in faith as they feel the Lord moving in their lives.
Well, our church here, Heart of Longmont, is a reconciling church, and I believe that the majority of folks here would choose to be open and accepting that one church model is probably the best. They'd be very supportive and I think proud of their denomination for taking a stand that allows for anyone and everyone to be able to serve Christ in any capacity. Personally, over the last few decades, I've undergone a change in my own position as well. I used to think that one had to measure up, so to speak, in certain ways in order to be acceptable. But I've come to understand that love and grace, that grace of God, that's what makes us acceptable. Who am I to judge? Like Peter on the rooftop in the story in Acts, we have had opportunities, and I know I have, to learn that we shouldn't call unclean what God has already called clean.
So at different points in our history over the last 35, 40 years, we've had a number of turning points, and some of those turning points have been really critical. And the critical nature of them, it's kind of like drawing a line in the sand, but somehow we've always been able to kind of modify that, work together, serve together. But now the sides have been drawn so tightly and so harshly in many ways that I don't think that there's a a good way for that expression to really be expressed in a unified way. I think there's likely to be some significant division when we talk about people leaving the church. People are going to leave the church for a number of different reasons. Some of them more astute theological kinds of decisions. Others will leave because of practical decisions. Some might even depart simply because they know that there's chaos and turmoil and they don't want to be a part of that, and they'll seek some place where it's a little calmer. But right now, it looks to me like it is just going to be the potential of chaos is right on the edge. When we think about the last 40 years, we've been on the edge a number of times with different issues. But right now, it feels like the edge has been so definitively defined that it's like a certain percentage of folks are going to fall off the edge, and it's going to be a time of great grief.
So what I would say to my neighbors that this is tough and it won't be easy. But remember the place of your salvation and follow the Spirit. Open up your ears to hear what the Spirit has to say. Open up your heart to receive what the Spirit is telling you today. Listen to the Spirit. Follow the Spirit. Be led by the Spirit. Trust the Spirit.
There are beautiful conversations to be had over the things we think that divide us, that really our stories are much more the same. So the choices that we may need to make offer an opportunity to hear those stories and to be in conversation with each other. The other reality about these choices is the division that could possibly be created. I think of the many faithful people who hold their beliefs very closely and don't want to change the way they think or feel. And if by making choices means that they have to give up something that they believe, some conviction that they have, then I see a little more strife and a sense of disconnection between people who have relationship and love being in church together.
Again, this is a time to go ahead and stop the recording and to talk amongst yourselves and share your thoughts about this information on the Commission on the Way Forward. Welcome back once again. Our final question for our interviewees was this: whatever passes at General Conference 2019, it is likely that a sizable group of people will leave the United Methodist Church. What would you say to your neighbors if that happens?
I think it's very discouraging for, I think, everyone involved in this situation. And that doesn't mean that we just give up, but we try harder, we keep plugging away, and hopefully the answers will come. If not one of these plans is adopted, I'm sure those folks will go back to the drawing board and they will come up with yet another plan.
Regardless of what happens, regardless of what decision is made, there will be trauma in the church, and that trauma grieves me. I hold a more traditional point of view, and in the West, that has become the minority view. In other places around the country, not necessarily the case, but there will be great grief that happens for the church, and I have no idea what it will look like in the future, but I know it will be remarkably different.
I wish it could be different, that we could remain united even when we can't always agree.
Well, I think if nothing changes, that the United Methodist Church will not be long for this world. What happens at General Conference in 2019 could have a dramatic effect on that. But I think the thing I would emphasize is that no matter what happens at General Conference, and no matter what the reaction of our sister churches and conferences and jurisdictions might be to that conference in February, that I still have faith in God's grace and God's moving in and among the people called Methodists, and I believe that God is planting the seeds for a great revival. There will be people called Methodists worshiping God in the future, and how and where and when that is unknown to any of us. But my prayer is that I can partner with God and His Holy Spirit to be able to bring about that revival and be a part of it, that we might continue to spread that scriptural holiness across the land as Wesley would have wanted us to.
I've already been telling my neighbors that in this time of transition, as folks leave the church in anticipation, that being faithful is not always comfortable. And sometimes we make hard decisions, but those who have chosen to leave, those who may choose to leave later, do not come to those decisions lightly. It's because they are faithful to what they believe, to what they hold in their heart, to the way that they connect to God. And there can only be blessing and hope when those decisions are made faithfully. I believe that our church will thrive, that there will be hope and blessing, even if we're a little smaller for a while. And I only wish blessings and hope and peace for those who find themselves searching elsewhere for their faith development and the way they want to serve God.
Things are just happening and just the politics of it all. And we sometimes have to be reminded of why we chose to follow Jesus in the first place. And sometimes everything that is happening politically distracts us from our purpose, why we were called to this work in the first place. And it causes us to be divided. And I feel that we are in a very divisive space and place. And I feel that we need to come back to a common ground where if we can remember the day that we committed our life to God and that fire that we felt, where we were compelled to get into God's word and we were compelled to share the gospel of liberty, of freedom, of justice to everyone that we came encounter with. And we just felt that need to just be amongst the people in worship and true, authentic worship. If we can come back to that place where we just authentically remember who God is and what God has done for us, if we can just remember the place where we first believed.
Now that you've heard our interviewee's thoughts on that question, this is an opportunity to go ahead and stop the recording yet again and to have a conversation with each other around how you would respond to that question. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. We're hoping that it was a time that was helpful to you as you think about how it is that we proceed as Methodists, as United Methodists, as Christians, and hopefully as people of grace, as we continue in conversations around a difficult and very divisive topic. Blessings on you and your faith community as you progress down the path God calls you to walk.